August 17th, 1943, 25,000 feet above Regensburg, Germany. Captain Robert Morgan grips the yoke of his B-17 Flying Fortress, his hands trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion. He's been awake for 31 hours straight. His crew has flown back-to-back bombing missions, a brutal marathon that pushes men past their breaking point. Morgan's co-pilot slumps forward, micro-sleeping at 200 miles per hour. The navigator's calculations drift off the page. In the ball turret below, the gunner's head drops forward, leaving a blind spot for German fighters prowling the formation. This isn't an isolated incident. By mid-1943, the 8th Air Force is hemorrhaging men and machines, not just from enemy fire, but from fatigue. Crew exhaustion contributes to an estimated 30% of operational losses. Pilots fall asleep during critical maneuvers. Navigators miscalculate, sending formations miles off course. Gunners fail to spot incoming Focke-Wulfs until it's too late. The statistics paint a grim picture. Life expectancy for a bomber crew, 11 missions. The requirement to rotate home, 25 missions. The mathematics of death are simple and terrifying. Of the 291,000 air crew in the Army Air Forces, over 52,000, nearly 1 in 5, will be killed. Thousands more wounded or captured. Combat fatigue accounts for 5,000 to 6,500 serious psychological casualties. Men crack mid-mission, clawing at cockpit walls, screaming to get out. RAF Bomber Command faces identical horrors. During the whole war, 51% of aircrew are killed on operations. Fatigue and fear are the most common causes of combat stress. The RAF begins labeling exhausted pilots as lacking moral fiber, a career-ending diagnosis that carries the stench of cowardice. The Allies are losing the air war not just to German guns, but to human biology. Commanders know intelligence about a German superdrug called Pervitin, methamphetamine that keeps Nazi soldiers fighting for days without rest. Wehrmacht distributed 35 million tablets in just spring and summer 1940. German pilots fly 50-hour missions, their judgment destroyed, but their eyes wide open. But what Morgan doesn't know, what none of them know, is that at this very moment, a controversial solution sits locked in medical cabinets across England. A drug synthesized 14 years earlier by a chemist who tested it on himself. A drug that military physicians call dangerous and potentially addictive. A drug that will save thousands of lives and spark a pharmaceutical controversy lasting 80 years. The problem of military fatigue is as old as warfare itself. Throughout history, commanders have sought ways to keep soldiers alert. Napoleon's troops chewed coca leaves. Civil War soldiers consumed opium-laced preparations by the millions. The Union Army alone requisitioned 10 million opium pills. World War I introduced widespread cocaine use among combatants. But modern aerial warfare creates a unique crisis. In 1939, as war engulfs Europe, military planners confront an unprecedented challenge. Bomber missions lasting 8, 10, sometimes 14 hours. Crews fighting at altitudes where oxygen deprivation compounds exhaustion. Target zones defended by fighters and flak, requiring split-second decisions that fatigue makes impossible. The traditional solutions fail spectacularly. Coffee helps initially, but leads to jittery hands, disastrous for precision bombing. Rotating rest schedules sound good on paper, but strategic bombing campaigns require sustained operations. Weather windows close fast. Target opportunities vanish. The Air Corps needs men who can fly mission after mission with minimal downtime. British physicians try various stimulants, cocaine derivatives, caffeine tablets in heroic doses. Nothing provides sustained alertness without severe side effects. Then intelligence reports confirm German secret, Pervitin, manufactured by Temmler-Verke Pharmaceutical Company. German troops call them Panzerschokolade, tank chocolate. Wehrmacht doctors prescribe it liberally. The results seem miraculous. Soldiers marching for days, pilots flying impossible hours. But Allied intelligence also documents the cost. German soldiers suffering psychotic breaks, cardiac failures, crashes following multi-day missions. Pervert and addled pilots believe their performance is excellent when it's catastrophically impaired. Still, the desperate arithmetic remains. Lose men to exhaustion or risk a pharmaceutical solution. In Britain, Air Marshal Arthur Harris commands RAF Bomber Command from February 1942. Bomber Harris believes in round-the-clock aerial assault, the RAF bombing by night, the Americans by day, giving Germany no respite. But his strategy demands superhuman endurance from already stretched crews. By late 1942, the situation reaches crisis levels. During a 24-hour period in November, some RAF squadrons fly multiple sorties. Men stagger from debriefing to aircraft, eyes red-rimmed, hands shaking. Medical officers report alarming rates of crew inability to complete missions due to exhaustion. Expert consensus says there's no safe chemical solution. The RAF's senior medical advisors warn that any stimulant powerful enough to defeat sleep carries unacceptable risks. Addiction, cardiac problems, impaired judgment masked by artificial alertness, potentially more dangerous than the fatigue itself. Dr. Charles Simons, consultant in neurology to the RAF, argues strenuously against pharmaceutical stimulants. He insists proper rest rotation is the only answer. Many senior physicians agree. The medical establishment views stimulant use as ethically questionable, turning soldiers into chemical automatons, compromising their long-term health for short-term tactical gains. American military doctors echo these concerns. The Surgeon General's office takes a conservative stance. Any powerful stimulant, they argue, crosses ethical lines. But one substance keeps appearing in classified reports: Benzedrine, a drug that's been commercially available since 1934, initially sold as an over-the-counter inhaler for nasal congestion. By 1937, available in tablet form by prescription for narcolepsy and what doctors tentatively call mild depression. Smith, Kline, and French pharmaceutical company markets it aggressively. From 1937 to 1939, they sell over 50 million dosage units in the United States alone. The drug proves popular with students studying for exams, long-haul truck drivers, and, ominously, becomes recreational among those seeking its euphoric effects. Abuse cases begin surfacing as early as 1940. But buried in medical literature, a few researchers note something interesting. The drug's active ingredient, amphetamine sulfate, appears more controllable than methamphetamine. Shorter duration, potentially less addictive, and when properly dosed, it might provide sustained alertness without the psychotic breaks plaguing German forces. The question isn't whether a solution exists, it's whether anyone has the courage or recklessness to propose using it. Gordon Alice doesn't look like a revolutionary. Born January 17, 1901 in Ohio, he's the son of a modest family with no medical background. But young Alice possesses fierce intellectual curiosity. He earns his bachelor's degree from the University of Montana, then makes his way to the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, where he completes his PhD in chemistry in 1926. By 1929, Alice is working in a small laboratory in Los Angeles, investigating treatments for asthma. The leading medication is ephedrine, derived from the Chinese ephedra plant. It works, but inconsistently. Supply remains unreliable. Alice wants to create a synthetic alternative, something chemists can manufacture reliably. He begins experimenting with compounds chemically similar to ephedrine. One molecule particularly interests him, beta-phenylisopropylamine. It's actually not new. A Romanian chemist named Lazar Edelianu first synthesized it back in 1887, but nobody investigated its physiological effects. It sat dormant in chemical literature for 42 years. Alez synthesizes a fresh batch. Then, following the scientific tradition of self-experimentation dating back to Humphrey Davy and beyond, Alz does something that will change warfare forever. On a spring afternoon in 1929, Alz has a physician friend inject him with 50 milligrams of the compound. The effects are immediate and profound. About 20 minutes in, Alice reports a feeling of well-being. His heart rate increases but remains controlled. His fatigue vanishes. His concentration sharpens dramatically. He feels euphoric but not impaired. He finds himself able to work intensely for hours without the usual mental fatigue. But Alice is a scientist first. He meticulously records every sensation, every physiological change. Heart rate, blood pressure, subjective alertness. He tests and retests, carefully varying dosages. He recruits volunteers for controlled studies. What emerges from his notebooks is striking. This compound, which he'll name amphetamine, doesn't just mask fatigue. It genuinely enhances wakefulness and concentration, at least temporarily. Alz publishes his findings and patents the discovery in 1932. Smith, Klein and French pharmaceutical company immediately recognizes commercial potential. They purchase Alez's patent rights and begin development. By 1934, they launch Benzedrine as an over-the-counter inhaler for nasal congestion. The product becomes a commercial success. But Alez grows increasingly ambivalent about his creation. As reports of recreational abuse surface, he begins to understand he's unleashed something more complicated than a simple asthma medication. The two most commonly reported effects, a sense of well-being and a feeling of exhilaration, combined with lessened fatigue in reaction to work, make amphetamine dangerously appealing. By 1937, Benzedrine sulfate tablets become available by prescription only, a rare step for that era. But the genie is out of the bottle. Students abuse it for all-night study sessions. Truck drivers use it to make impossible delivery schedules. Athletes seek performance advantages. Smith, Klein and French's sales skyrocket anyway. Competition emerges as other pharmaceutical companies rush to create their own amphetamine formulations once Alez's patent protections begin weakening. Then war breaks out in Europe, and suddenly the question changes from "should we use this?" to "can we afford not to?" Late 1941, an unlikely coalition of maverick military physicians begins private conversations. They're not official, not sanctioned, just doctors who've watched too many crews return from missions hollow-eyed and shaking. Men who've seen pilots fall asleep in cockpits, navigators too exhausted to calculate, gunners missing obvious targets. The group includes RAF medical officers who've read Alez's research. They begin conducting quiet experiments, not formal trials. Those would require official approval they know they won't get. Instead, they offer Benzedrine tablets to volunteer aircrew before particularly demanding missions. The dosing is crude: 5 milligrams, 10, sometimes 20. They're guessing, extrapolating from civilian medical use. The results are undeniable. Pilots who take Benzedrine before marathon missions report dramatically improved alertness. Reaction times remain sharp for hours beyond when exhaustion would normally set in. Most remarkably, they report feeling confident, even aggressive, qualities that combat aviation demands. But the doctors know they're walking an ethical tightrope. These informal trials violate medical protocols. No formal study design, no control groups, no long-term safety monitoring. They're essentially experimenting on servicemen in combat conditions. Worse, they're doing it with a drug already showing addiction potential in civilian populations. One RAF medical officer, Squadron Leader Norman Tattersfield, meticulously documents his observations. He notes that bomber crews given Benzedrine before enduring long missions over Germany demonstrate sustained alertness for up to 15 hours, maintained concentration during complex bombing runs, reduced anxiety about mission stress, faster reaction times when engaging enemy fighters. But Tattersfield also notes concerning patterns. Crews become irritable during the drug's decline. Some request additional doses. A few report difficulty sleeping even after the drug should wear off. When Tattersfield attempts to present his findings officially, the response is immediate and harsh. Senior RAF medical staff erupt. The room literally erupts in shouted arguments. Conservative physicians call it chemical coercion. One doctor thunders, "That is absolutely illegal. You're turning our pilots into addicts." Dr. Charles Simons, the RAF's senior neurology consultant, condemns the practice outright. "This is not medicine," he declares. "This is pharmaceutical roulette with men's lives." The American military takes an even harder line. When word reaches the Surgeon General's office about informal Benzedrine trials, the response is swift bureaucratic shutdown. Any officer caught distributing stimulants without explicit authorization faces potential court-martial. The official position, proper rest rotation, solves fatigue, period. For months, the maverick doctors retreat. Their crude prototype, a dosing protocol based more on guesswork than science, gets buried in classified files. The informal trials stop. Everything suggests the experiment is over, but combat has a way of forcing hard choices. By late 1942, both British and American bomber commands face catastrophic attrition. The strategic bombing campaign against Germany is failing, not because they can't reach targets, but because exhausted crews can't execute missions effectively. The statistics become impossible to ignore. Between September and December 1942, the RAF loses 1,404 aircraft. Accident rates soar. Friendly fire incidents increase as exhausted gunners shoot at anything that moves. The casualty rate among bomber crews reaches levels that threaten to make strategic bombing unsustainable. Something has to change. November 1942, Royal Air Force Headquarters, Middlesex. Air Marshal Arthur Bomber Harris requests an emergency meeting with senior medical staff. Harris is a man who believes in brutal arithmetic. If Benzedrine can increase mission success rates by even 10%, it's worth the risk. He's seen intelligence about German Pervitin use. He refuses to fight with one hand tied behind his back. The meeting begins with Dr. Simons presenting the official medical position. Stimulants are unacceptable, too dangerous, too ethically questionable. Then Harris drops casualty reports on the conference table. "Gentlemen," he says, his voice ice cold, "we're losing the war of attrition, not to German fighters, to human exhaustion. I don't care about your medical ethics when my boys are dying because they fell asleep over Germany." The room erupts. Conservative physicians argue this sets a dangerous precedent. Where does it end? Performance-enhancing drugs for infantry? Morphine to keep wounded soldiers fighting? Harris is proposing to turn airmen into chemical soldiers, but one doctor stands. Dr. James Pugh, an RAF medical officer who participated in the informal trials. He presents Tattersfield's data, the real-world results showing improved mission performance, reduced casualties among crews who used Benzedrine. With respect, Pugh argues, we're not talking about permanent drug use. We're talking about carefully controlled doses for specific missions, 5 to 10 milligrams, taken under medical supervision. The dosage is less than what we prescribe for narcolepsy patients. The data shows it works, Pugh continues. Crews stay alert. Mission success rates improve. and the preliminary safety profile, while not perfect, suggests manageable risks when properly administered. The argument rages for hours. Finally, Air Chief Marshal Sir Charles Portal, Chief of the Air Staff, makes a command decision. The kind of decision that defines careers and potentially wars. "We will authorize limited trials," Portal announces. "Benzedrine sulfate will be made available to air crews for operational missions exceeding 8 hours. Dosage strictly controlled by medical officers. 5 milligrams initially, 10 maximum. And I want comprehensive monitoring of every crew that uses it." Dr. Simon stands, his face flushed. "You're making a terrible mistake. The long-term consequences of losing this war," Portal cuts him off, "are considerably worse." On November 22nd, 1942, the RAF officially approves benzedrine sulfate for operational use by Bomber Command air crews. The American military follows 3 months later, though more cautiously. The U.S. Army Air Forces authorizes Benzedrine in February 1943, but only for extreme operational necessity. Commanders can request it for particularly demanding missions. Flight surgeons must approve every distribution. If you're finding this story fascinating, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Stories like this, about the hidden decisions that shaped World War II, take extensive research. Your subscription helps us continue investigating these forgotten chapters of history. Now let's see how this controversial drug changed the course of the air war. But approval is just the beginning. Now comes the question everyone has been avoiding. Does it actually work in combat? The answer comes from an operation that will test Benzedrine and the men taking it to the absolute limit. June 5th, 1944, bomber stations across southern England. Tomorrow is D-Day. Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history, depends on absolute air superiority. Allied bombers must destroy German coastal defenses, cut transportation routes, and prevent Luftwaffe counterattacks. The mission requirements are brutal. Multiple sorties, back-to-back missions, some crews flying 3 times in 24 hours. It's exactly the scenario Benzedrine was designed for. At dozens of airfields, flight surgeons brief crews on the new protocol. Each pilot receives a small white tablet, benzedrine sulfate, 5 milligrams. Wakey wakey pills, crews start calling them, mixing gallows humor with genuine relief. Captain James Rosie Rosenthal, 100th Bomb Group, remembers that night. The doc comes in, hands out these little pills, says they'll keep us sharp. We're exhausted already, and D-Day hasn't even started. I took it. We all did. What choice did we have? June 6th, 0400 hours. First wave launches. Over 2,200 heavy bombers from the 8th Air Force alone. RAF Bomber Command adds hundreds more. The largest aerial armada ever assembled. Captain Robert Powell, 379th Bomb Group, pilots his B-17 through pre-dawn darkness toward the Normandy coast. He's been awake 23 hours. By all biological logic, he should be barely functional. But 45 minutes after taking Benzedrine, he reports feeling unusually sharp, focused, tired, but able to concentrate completely. His crew hammers German positions at Omaha Beach with precision that will save countless lives among troops landing below. By nightfall June 6th, Powell flies his second mission of the day. Total flight time, 14 hours. Time awake, approaching 40 hours. Without those pills, he'll later write, I'd have been a danger to my crew. With them, I flew 2 perfect missions. The statistics from D-Day operations tell the story. Over 14,000 Allied sorties flown in 24 hours. Accident rate significantly below predicted levels. Despite exhaustion, mission success rate exceeding 90% for primary targets. Friendly fire incidents minimal, despite congested airspace. Flight surgeons monitoring crews report consistent patterns. Benzedrine extends effective performance by approximately 8 to 12 hours beyond normal fatigue limits. Crews taking it demonstrate sustained reaction times, maintaining 85 to 90% of well-rested performance levels. Improved concentration, successfully navigating complex bombing runs, maintained morale, reduced anxiety about mission exhaustion, higher completion rates, fewer aborted missions due to crew fatigue. But the data also reveals concerning trends. After the drug wears off, crews experience hard crashes, irritability spikes. Some request additional doses, the first whispers of dependence. Flight surgeons implement strict protocols, no more than 2 doses in 48 hours. Mandatory rest period after Benzedrine missions. Careful monitoring for addiction signs. The scale of distribution becomes staggering. Between 1943 and 1945, American forces distribute between 200 and 500 million Benzedrine tablets to service members. The Pentagon issues an estimated 250 million to troops specifically for combat operations. By 1945, approximately 15% of Army fighter pilots use the tablets regularly on demanding missions. The RAF's numbers are equally dramatic. Britain approves 72 million doses of Benzedrine for use across all military branches. The annual consumption per person in the Royal Navy reaches 21.1 pills. The Air Force, 17.5 pills. Not every crew embraces it. Lieutenant Donald Miller, navigator, 305th Bomb Group, refuses. "I didn't trust it," he remembers. "Saw guys getting jittery, couldn't sleep after. I'd rather be tired than jumpy over Germany." His crew respects his choice, but they take their pills. German perspective. Captured Luftwaffe pilots provide revealing testimony about the drug's battlefield impact. Hauptmann Heinrich Erler, fighter ace with 209 kills, interrogated after his capture in April 1945. "We noticed the change in American crews around mid-1943. Earlier, if we could catch bombers on their return, many were easy prey, exhausted crews, sloppy formations. Later missions, they stayed sharp even after hours in the air. We suspected drugs, but our intelligence couldn't confirm what." Another German pilot, whose name appears only as Oberleutnant Schmidt in interrogation records, offers grudging respect. "Their discipline improved dramatically. Night missions especially. We expected them to be disorganized, exhausted. Instead, they maintained tight formation, aggressive defensive fire. It cost us dearly." The Germans have their own stimulant problems. By 1944, Wehrmacht reports widespread Pervitin addiction among troops. Unlike the relatively controlled Allied protocols, German distribution was often chaotic. Massive doses, unlimited access, no medical oversight. The results speak to the difference between systematic medical use and pharmaceutical free-for-all. Lives saved. The numbers remain debatable, but military analysts make compelling arguments. A 1945 Army Air Forces study estimates that Benzedrine use contributed to 12 to 18% reduction in accident rates during extended operations, 10 to 15% improvement in mission completion rates. Reduced friendly fire incidents during complex multi-squadron operations. Fewer aircraft losses due to crew exhaustion-related errors. If those percentages hold, the drug may have saved thousands of lives, both air crews and the ground forces they supported with more accurate, sustained bombing. Lieutenant Colonel Russell Strong, flight surgeon, 8th Air Force. Was it perfect? No. Did some men develop dependencies? Yes. About 3 to 5% showed problematic use patterns. But did it help us win the air war? Absolutely. The alternative was watching exhausted crews die because they fell asleep at the controls. By war's end, Benzedrine becomes standard issue in survival kits. Downed pilots receive small allotments for emergency situations, helping them stay alert during evasions behind enemy lines. Before we get to the incredible aftermath, make sure you've hit that like button. Over 80% of our viewers watch without subscribing, which is insane for free history content this detailed. It takes literally 2 seconds. Subscribe now so you never miss these deep dive documentaries. Now, what happened to Benzedrine after the war might surprise you. The end of World War II creates an unexpected problem. Millions of soldiers returning home with chemical dependencies. But for the majority who use Benzedrine under medical supervision during wartime, the transition proves manageable. Most simply, stop taking it. The addiction fears, while legitimate, don't materialize on the catastrophic scale predicted by 1942's skeptics. Still, the post-war years bring reckoning. By the late 1940s, civilian Benzedrine abuse explodes. Returning veterans share war stories about energy pills. Students discover them. Long-haul truckers make them standard equipment. By 1950, America faces what public health officials call the country's first amphetamine epidemic. The pharmaceutical industry responds with competitive fervor. When Alice's patent protections expire in the 1950s, dozens of companies rush to market their own amphetamine formulations. Dexedrine, Dexamil. Diet pills containing amphetamines become fashionable among suburban housewives. Gordon Alice watches his creation spiral into controversy. In interviews during the 1950s, Alice expresses profound ambivalence. "I developed amphetamine to treat asthma," he says in a 1954 interview. "What it became, a drug of abuse, a military stimulant, I never intended any of that." He refuses to profit from military use beyond his initial patent sale. He declines lucrative consulting offers from pharmaceutical companies eager to leverage his name. He focuses instead on other research, trying to distance himself from amphetamine's increasingly problematic legacy. Alice dies on March 31st, 1963, at age 62 from complications following a stroke. His obituaries mention his numerous contributions to pharmacology. Many don't even mention amphetamine, the discovery that defined his legacy. Meanwhile, the regulatory backlash builds. The FDA, responding to epidemic abuse, finally bans Benzedrine inhalers in 1959. Tablet forms become Schedule II controlled substances, requiring strict medical supervision. By the 1970s, amphetamine prescriptions decline dramatically as doctors recognize the addiction dangers. But the military never completely abandons the concept. During the Vietnam War, American forces distribute more amphetamines than in WWII, but with increasingly controversial results. The Gulf War sees continued use of go pills, now refined to more selective compounds. Modern relevance. Today, military pilots still use stimulants for demanding missions. In 2012, the U.S. Air Force switches from amphetamines to modafinil, brand name Provigil, a newer wakefulness drug with theoretically lower addiction potential. F-16 pilots flying extended combat air patrols over Iraq and Afghanistan carry go pills as standard equipment. The debate Gordon Alice ignited in 1929 continues. Where's the line between medical necessity and chemical enhancement? When does a tool become a crutch? How do we balance immediate tactical needs against long-term health consequences? The applications extend beyond military aviation. Today, amphetamine derivatives treat ADHD, Adderall, narcolepsy, and other conditions affecting millions. The pharmaceutical market Alice accidentally created is worth billions. The humble hero. Gordon Alice never sought fame for amphetamine. He published his findings in scientific journals, took his patent money, and moved on to other research. He avoided publicity, rarely gave interviews, and never wrote a memoir. When asked near the end of his life about amphetamine's role in winning the World War II, Alice reportedly said, "I discovered a chemical compound. What men chose to do with it, for good or ill, that was beyond my control." Moral lesson. The story of Benzedrine in World War II reminds us that war forces impossible choices. Medical ethics designed for peacetime collide with battlefield necessity. The clean lines of right and wrong blur when the alternative is defeat. Those maverick doctors who first gave pilots Benzedrine violated protocols. They experimented on servicemen without proper oversight. By peacetime standards, their actions were indefensible. But their patients came home alive. Thousands of bomber crews completed missions that fatigue would have made impossible. D-Day succeeded partly because exhausted pilots stayed alert long enough to deliver precision strikes. The strategic bombing campaign that crippled Nazi industry relied on crews flying back-to-back marathons that human biology alone couldn't sustain. Gordon Alice didn't intend to change warfare when he injected himself with amphetamine in 1929. He was just a curious chemist trying to improve asthma medication. But his discovery highlights a profound truth. Science is neutral. The compound he synthesized saved lives and destroyed them. It helped win a war and sparked an addiction epidemic. It demonstrated human ingenuity and human recklessness in equal measure. The question Alice left us with remains unanswered. Just because we can enhance human performance chemically, does that mean we should? 80 years later, as we develop ever more sophisticated cognitive enhancers, that question matters more than ever. The exhausted pilots who took those little white pills and flew into history didn't have time for philosophical debates. They had a war to win. They won it, and they paid prices we're still calculating.